We're continuing with volume 1 of Likkutei Sichot and Parashat Tazria. And we're in chapter 6, page 219 in the Hebrew. כפי שדובר פעמים מספר, כפי שדובר מספר פעמים, הרי כל דבר גשמי ובייחוד כזה הכתוב בתורה נמצא גם ברוחניות, ומבחינתו הרוחנית הוא משתשב ונוצר כפי שהוא בגשמיות. So everything has a spiritual source. Everything that we discussed in physicality, this whole discussion about the woman or the man inseminating first and then coming out as a male or as a female, as a boy or a girl, all this, we're now going to see what it means spiritually. כן גם העניין של זכר ונקבה, the two most maybe important words that we have in language, male and female, al pratehem, with all their details, they also have a spiritual source. א', הבדל בין איש מזריע תחילה לבין אישה מזרעה תחילה. ב', הבדל בין עתה לבין לעתיד מצוי גם מבחינה רוחנית לגבי עבודתו הרוחנית בנפש האדם. So the same difference that we saw here between whoever inseminates first and the difference between now and in the future. When in the future it will not only be that if a woman inseminates first, but also if the male does. If the male is the first one to inseminate, he can also beget a male. These two things, these two particular details that we just learned, they have a corresponding principle in spirituality. What is this? Chapter 7. בליקוטי תורה מוסבר מאמר הז"ל מבחינת המשמעות הרוחנית. So in Likkutei Torah, the Alter Rebbe already explained what these terms mean spiritually. איש ואישה הם הקדוש ברוך הוא וכנסת ישראל. So the simplest meaning of a man and a woman, this is from Shir Hashirim, from the Song of Songs, is that the male and the female, they represent God and the congregation of Israel. Pirush ish mazriya tchila, what does it mean that the man inseminates first then, using this correspondence? She'hitorerut matchila milemala, that first of all God starts. The awakening starts above. God is awakened. Kum hitnaer Hashem, ki gibor mitnaer miyayin. Itaruta dileila. This is called the awakening above. V'isha mazrat tchila, and when the woman inseminates first, what we're talking about is sheitarut matchila ba'adam itaruta detata, is when the awakening begins from below. Okay? So there's different types of things. By the way, this is all related to whether or not, about Zionism, there's a very big machlokus. How did we get to Zionism? Because the whole question about Zionism is who awakens who.
You took a wrong turn.
No, the whole thing is that there's an awakening, right? There's an awakening going on that everybody sees. The world is not the same world it was 100 years ago. The Jewish people are not the same Jewish people they were 100 years ago. Something happened. The question is, do we have to wait for Hashem to wake up, or can we wake up first? It's a big machlokas. So one direction was the Satmar Rebbe's, Rebbe Yelish, who wrote a book called Vayoel Moshe. I don't want to say anything about the lumdus in the book. I want to say something about the idea that he had. And the idea that he had was that all of Zionism moving to the land of Israel and living here. I'm not talking about setting up state or anything like that. That I'm not interested in. But living here, moving here, making the jump, making the leap. He said it's completely forbidden. Why is it forbidden? Because, first of all, because there's a medrash that says that it's forbidden. And there's a medrash about Shir Hashirim, about the Song of Songs, that is forbidden for different reasons. But more importantly, he said, it doesn't work. Because an awakening from below cannot lead to something permanent, cannot lead to something that has concrete existence. Because what is it called? That when the awakening is from below, okay, so it's weak.
But the awakening from below makes an awakening from above.
Can, if it does.
Which in turn
if it does.
Another awakening.
Can actually make some kind of awakening. Yeah. So, if there is such an awakening, so what is it like? It's like the female awakening. And after the female awakens, what does she beget? She begets a son, a boy. So let's see what that means. So ish mazriat chila yoled nekeva. When the male, meaning when God awakens first, what is the result? The result is a female. The result is a girl. It's feminine. שההתעוררות באה מלמעלה נוצרת למטה בחינת נקבה. But when the awakening comes from above, all you get is the female. That's what comes out. דבר שאינו של קיימא. And the feminine is considered to be something that does not have constant existence. Good? So we'll say now is because nashim da'atan kalot. What does it mean that nashim da'atan kalot? It means that it's hard for them to focus on something and stay connected to it. Okay? The way we explain it today usually is that actually... What?
They have a da'at, which is kal, which means that when it comes to dinim, when it comes to making judgments,
they're very quick.
They're moved by their emotions.
Very quickly. Right.
Moved by their emotions.
To become attached very quickly. But to become attached very quickly also means that you're not fixed onto something. That your mind is quick to move between things. So one of the things that can cause, for instance, is multitasking. You can be very good at multitasking. But it's very hard for you to keep focus on one thing over time. It's much easier to have this or that. Now, we don't see it that way anymore. We see that today there are women who are just as able to fix their minds on something and follow it through if it takes a year or 2 or 3. They can do it just as well as any man can. Okay. So he's not talking about that. He doesn't want to get into that area. He's just saying something very simple. The da'at is kal. However you interpret it, kal means that it's light. It's not heavy. It doesn't sit well. How you want to interpret it, he doesn't care. But he's talking here now about who? He's talking about God. He says that if God awakens, it's easy to understand what it means. If God awakens and he shows me something, how much weight is that going to carry over time in my life? The surprising answer is very, very little. And people think that if God suddenly awakens and shows them something, he pulls the screen for a second and he shows you what's going on behind the closed door. Right? Under the hood. He lifts the hood, he shows you how the engine works. You're very impressed. That impression is going to last a very short time. It's not going to have a permanent place in your mind. Okay? The Alter Rebbe says this much. In Torah Or, we saw it a few years ago, that if Hashem would come down with all his malachim, all his angels suddenly and appear here right next to us, right here, he can fit anywhere, we would be impressed for 5 minutes. And 5 minutes later, we wouldn't remember that he's here. Why? Because it's an awakening from above. You didn't do any work. So he says, for instance, what did Matan Torah help? It helped for 7 days. That's all. That's all it helped. It was good for 7 days after that. From then on, it was downhill. Even giving the Torah, even Hashem coming down to give the Torah, is not a recipe for changing people. How do people change? From the opposite direction. That im isha mazriat chila, the female, meaning the congregation of Israel, inseminates first, then you have permanent change. Then molida zachar, then she brings about a male. Okay? So it's very, very important. So what does this mean? Because man has not prepared a vessel, and the awakening only came from above, it has nowhere to grasp, to take hold of the psyche. So the person, even though he was very impressed by it for a moment, it doesn't leave a lasting impression. But on the other hand, when the beginning of the awakening starts from below, and when he awakens, he creates a vessel for it. Because that's what he wants to do. He wants to awaken means to start with a vessel, because that's what he does. That's how people start. Yoledet Zachar. Then he's the female, the congregation of Israel, from below, an awakening from below. And this causes the child that's born, what's born out of this awakening, to be male. And the other thing that happens is that the person receives it internally, it changes him. So which one is better? On the face of it, it's always better that the person awaken. The same thing, one of the biggest problems that we have in Kiruv today is, do you pay people to come and hear something? Okay. If you pay someone to come and hear something, you can rest assured it will come in through here and go out through there just as fast as it was spoken. So if you convince students in university, come listen to a lecture on, I don't know, the most interesting thing you have in the world to say about Yiddishkeit, the chances of it having any kind of impact are zero. What will have an impact? The fact that you got them to come out, and now you talk to them. And now you create a personal connection. That can work. But it doesn't matter how interesting it is, and how impressive it is, and how, fire and brimstone it might be, or how eloquent like Rabbi Sachs it was. It doesn't matter. They won't remember a thing from what was said, because you can't remember because you didn't make a vessel. When I pay you to come hear something, there's no vessel. You have no interest. To make a vessel means that I'm interested in hearing. And so I will chase it down to the ends of the earth. I remember there was one book that I chased down all the way from Johns Hopkins in Baltimore to Harvard. So I took a road trip, 8-hour road trip, one weekend. I stayed by friends over Shabbos, and Sunday, this was a library that was open on Sunday at Harvard. I went there and I ordered the book, it was closed stack, and I sat all of Sunday and I read the entire book. I can't forget a word from that book. I have forgotten over the years, but it left such a strong impression. There's a guy called Shavtai Ben Dov. It's not so important today in my life, but I really chased it down back then, and it opened my eyes to see he was a non-frum Jew who was part of the resistance here against the British. And in the 60s, he suddenly realized that he had been sold a bunch of, call it whatever you do in England, baloney. And he realized that he didn't understand Yiddishkeit. He had no idea what it means to be a Jew. And he started learning. And he realized that the worst problem we have on the way to Geula is the state of Israel. The biggest problem. Not because the state of Israel is itself a problem, but because the principles on which it was founded and what it's trying to do, they are instrumental in making it impossible for a person to really see what Yiddishkeit is about. Again, it's not done out of... No, I was 16 and a half then. No, leave that alone. That's a different thing. He's not talking about that. It's much deeper than that argument. Much, much deeper. It goes way deeper. When I was 17 then, not 16 and a half, I was 17 and a half. It was my sophomore year of college. And I remember the tremendous impression. What? Sophomore. See, you English, you don't know. How do you keep track of people in school? How do you know what year they're in? So in America, they actually have words for everything. So you're a freshman, a sophomore, a junior, and a senior. That's how you take care of the 4 years. Anyway, so it was a tremendous thing. Well, why? Because what a vessel I made. I drove for 8 hours to read this book. You couldn't order it. They didn't let you order it from from library to library at the time. So it left a tremendous impression. Something that you work hard on building the vessel for, it has a real lasting impression on you. Lamrot zot, nonetheless, even though begetting a female, meaning something that has less of an impression, is not as good as having something that's like a male, which is a lasting impression. There's still a benefit to the male awakening first, meaning God awakening first, awakening from above. Because when the awakening is from below, the most you can hope for is what you can build the vessel for. And all you can think about is something limited. So if I have expectations about what I want from something, the expectations can only be as big as whatever I hold in my head, whatever I expect, whatever I have on my radar. But when God awakens first, when the effluence is coming from above to below, then light that is infinite, that is beyond the limits of reality, can come down. And that's why you actually pay people to come somewhere, because you say, you on your radar, you don't have listening to so-and-so. You don't have this topic on your radar even. You don't even care. I'm going to give you something that, you're right, is way beyond your vessel. You're not going to contain it. It's not going to leave a lasting impression. But I got you to connect to something that's beyond your limits. And that is a tremendous benefit. So when awakening happens from above, and there's no question that the awakening to come to Eretz Yisrael happened from above. Who did it start with? It started with the Baal Shem Tov. And then it went on with the Gra. And then it came back to the Magid. And it was bouncing back and forth, in the bastions of Torah learning and of Chassidus at that time. But that light was too big. There was nobody who could hold it. They couldn't hold on to it. They couldn't make a vessel from it. It was too big. So they came to Eretz Yisrael, and they remained dependent on the money that was sent to them from Chutz La'aretz, from abroad. It took 100 years, even a little bit more, until people began to be self-sustaining. Jews began to self-sustain in Eretz Yisrael. But now the tide is turning. People don't see it. They're missing the boat. The tide is completely turning now. Very soon, it's going to be the Jews in Eretz Yisrael who are going to be holding on to Yiddishkeit around the world. It's the way it is already in many ways. Okay. In the Torah, it's already turned. There's no substantial Torah that's not coming out of Eretz Yisrael now. It's the way it is. Okay. The last of the previous generation that were in America, they're gone. I'm not saying there's no Talmidei Chachamim, there are. But the innovations are now starting to come from here. In any case, so it's both monetary and it's spiritual. So there is a benefit to each one of these signs, whether Hashem awakens or we awaken. The benefit, the superiority of the man, meaning Hashem awakening from above first, is in the light. It's greater light, it's infinite light. But when the woman awakens first, then the light has a vessel to enter and to integrate with. And so then it's integrated into the person. But in the future it will be ish ve'ish yuladba, that both a man and a woman, when they awaken, meaning whether the awakening is from above or the awakening is from below, yuladba, you receive a male. So it will be both a light that is beyond the world, and it will constantly be integrated. As long as you awaken. If you don't awaken, then it'll be probably a little bit less. But if you awaken, then even the light that comes from above, even if you make the tiniest vessel, anything, the light that comes from above is already strong enough to be concrete, to become integrated into your life. Okay? Shnei Anyanim, chapter 9. These two principles, these two issues of Hamshacha mimala lemata v'shel ha'alaa mimata lemala, of effluence coming down and awakening or elevation coming from below. Hem hamshamshim gam klalit ha'evdel ben. There are also, so now we're getting into a second topic, that you can also see this same idea of an awakening from above and awakening from below, or effluence comes from above and the elevation comes from below, in the difference between the 2 months of Tishrei and Nisan. What's so interesting about Nisan and Tishrei? We're now coming into Nisan, right? On Shabbos we'll have Rosh Chodesh Nisan. ביחס לחודשים ניסן ותשרי נאמר במדרש, about these 2 months, מדרש, משבחר הקדוש ברוך הוא בעולמו קבע בו ראשי חודשים ושנים. That when God chose his world, he had to choose it. He set in it the beginnings of months and the beginnings of years. Okay? What's the difference between the beginning of a month and the beginning of years? It's very simple. That there's a beginning of the months, that's the new moon. And the beginning of the year, what's the beginning of the year? How do you know when the beginning of the year is? Rosh Hashanah, when man was created. The day that man was created, that is the first day of the year. That's simple, because there's nothing astronomically special about the first of Tishrei in terms of where anything that's going on in the heavens. Now he explains. This is still the Medrash. And when he chose Jacob and his sons, Kavabo, he set Rosh Chodesh El Geula, a first of the month of redemption. So what's the first of the month of redemption? That's obviously the first day of Nisan, because Chodesh Zelachem, Rosh Chodeshim. This, the head of this month, the beginning of this month, the month of Nisan, is the first of all months for you. Rosh Hashanah, Mishabachar Kadosh Baruch Hu Ba'olamo, Hu B'Chodesh Tishrei. So the Rosh Hashanah that Hashem set and chose, set after he chose this world, is on the first of Tishrei. The Chodesh El Geula, that was set later, meaning it wasn't set, it took 2,400 years until God set the first month of the year. Until then, there was no first month of the year. People didn't know which one was the first month. It was up for grabs. But once he chose Jacob and his sons, then he set the first of Nisan as the first of all months. Besefer HaAkedah, there's a very important book from the 14th century. Rabbi Yitzchak Arama is his name. And it's called the Book of Akedah. Why it's called the Book of Akedah is a long story, but essentially it's connected to his first name, Yitzchak. That's. So there's many books that talk about the significance of the different months. More recent, we have the Bnei Yisachar. The Bnei Yisachar, he also built his entire book. This book, he had many books, but the book called Bnei Yisachar, the children of Yisachar, Bnei Yisachar Yodei Bina La'itim. It's a verse in Chronicles. It says that they knew the secret of the calendar. So the Bnei Yisachar is also a book that's based on explaining the significance of the months. So there it's explained like this. There are 2 ways in which God runs the world. Okay? How does he, what we call providence? There is Hanagat Tivit, there is natural providence, V'hanagat Nisit Na'alet Min HaTeva. And there is supernatural providence, where the providence goes above and beyond nature. Betishrei Rosh Hashanah L'hanagat HaTeva. On Rosh Hashanah, the Rosh Hashanah of Tishrei, the first day of Tishrei, that is the first day of divine providence according to nature. Why? שכן באחד בתשרי הייתה בריאת האדם, גמר הבריאה שעל פי סדר הטבע. Because on the first of Tishrei, that wasn't the first day of creation, it was the 6th day of creation. What was created on the 6th day? Man. And man is the final culmination of the natural order of creation. The first account of creation follows a natural order. By natural order, we mean that it follows how we would think about it. Meaning when we think about, it's an evolutionary process. You start from the simple and you go to the complex. That's called the natural order of things in the Rishonim, in the medieval sages. בניסן, ראש השנה להנהגה הנעלית מן הטבע. But on Nisan we have the beginning of the year, the start of the year, really the first month of the year, even though the year started 6 months earlier. But the first month of the year is Nisan. And so we have the beginning of the year for providence that is above nature, that goes above, beyond nature. שכן בחודש ניסן הייתה יציאת מצרים, הניסים שלמעלה מהטבע. Because on Nisan we had the miracles of coming out of Egypt, and these miracles were above and beyond nature. I think we have to end, right? So we'll end here.
Why?
I have to go. It's a 10 to 10. I also have to go sometimes.
You know?
Yeah. So we'll continue tomorrow, B'ezrat Hashem.